The discourse around Resident Evil 6 has always been very heated and especially very diverse. Some people absolutely hate it with a passion, others love it and see barely any flaws with it. Some enjoy certain aspects of the game, but dislike others while still having fun. However, for some, those exact same issues completely ruin the experience. And then there's also literally every opinion in between. The general consensus also seems to constantly switch depending on where you look. Sometimes it's the underrated masterpiece, and other times it's not disliked enough. Sometimes people will claim most of the hate stems from the history surrounding the game, so how it released at the peak of action Resident Evil, and that's why the new generation of players don't despise it as much, while others hate it regardless of their relationship with the series. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this debate keeps on forever, and I wonder how a potential RE6 remake will change it. Anyway, what I actually want to talk about is the popular claim that it's not a bad action game, but rather just a bad Resident Evil, and that's where all the animosity really comes from, because I see it as the complete opposite. In my opinion, without the Resident Evil name attached to it, barely anyone will still talk about this game today, and there certainly wouldn't be these endless debates about whether it's secretly amazing or misunderstood, since most will simply see it as an at best mediocre action game from the early 2010s, like so many others. I'm sure that there are going to be many different opinions about this, so please comment yours down below. But for now, I just want to explain my own. So first off, we have to understand why this claim is even that popular. Usually when you see people arguing about the quality of the game, at least one single person will go ahead and be like, the combat is actually the best in the franchise and the best part of the game. Which is then elaborated by talking about incredibly deep mechanics and all the different ways on how to engage in combat, which is, no matter how you feel about it, insofar true that it's indeed the most varied combat Resident Evil has to offer. You can just use your weapons like usually, or you do some crazy dodges, or you go melee only, or some combinations with the movement, or you rely on the QTEs, or you do whatever you want. For example, the RE4 remake offers a lot of ways to personalize your playstyle as well, but otherwise this variety is arguably unmatched in the series and therefore also kinda unusual. Compared to all the survival horror oriented games that only offer a few weapons and fairly simple combat that basically just consists of aiming and then shooting the slow moving enemy, anything more is quickly labeled as unfitting to the franchise. I'd argue this stance isn't all that prominent anymore, but back when RE6 came out, it was surely more popular and one of the initial easy reasons as to why it's totally not Resident Evil. So that's the first point right here, and then there's also a second one. I know, surprising. This one is about all the action. I know, surprising. Inspired by other action shooters of that time, the game is full of explosions, QTEs, crazy set pieces, scripted moments, vehicle sections, a billion enemies, and so on. This is very typical for action games, but again, not so much for Resident Evil. Hence, when the game came out, some fans were like, this is not Resident Evil because too much, see my previous sentences, and thus the game sucks ass. And even though some still follow the sentiment, I'd argue that together with the found appreciation for the combat, it has kinda transformed to, due to the action, this is not a good Resident Evil, but the action is good, so it's still a good action game on its own. Of course, while this is very nice, just like subscribing to my channel, which most of you probably haven't done yet, why do I disagree with this? First of all, in my opinion, the action is simply not as good as often stated. Let's look at some other entries like both RE4's, to a lesser extent 5, and even some of the fixed camera angle games like the original Resident Evil 3. All of these games are full of action, maybe not to the degree of 6, but still. The action is also genuinely great and works in favor of those games. It's fun to blow up stuff, creatively kill enemies, have the occasional entertaining set piece, and the game's mechanics work hand in hand with the action. They prove wonderfully that action has been a part of Resident Evil since the beginning, and that larger amounts of it can work just as well as the lesser amounts, as long as the pacing remains great and the mechanics fun. Resident Evil 6 on the other hand, and I've talked about this before in other videos, just fails at this spectacularly. At every moment it tries way too much at once without succeeding at a single thing, and it doesn't understand why previous games were actually fun. No matter if it's the 4 campaigns that constantly overlap, or the recycled locations and stretching of ideas far beyond what they can carry, or the constant interruptions to the gameplay with restricted slow walking sections and scripted moments, or the supposedly deep mechanics that are hidden behind awkward button combinations most players will never even properly learn, or the constant QTEs, or the gimmicky vehicle sections and some genuinely awful ideas like the snowmobile sequences or Leon's water section. At so many points, the game does not create thrilling, great action, but just straight up frustrating situations that kill the pacing and suck all the enjoyment out of it. Ah yeah, and putting one of the worst HUDs I have ever seen on top wasn't ideal either. Like I said in the beginning, how you feel about these aspects depends on you, and it could easily be that you either loved or didn't mind all of these. But in my opinion, you get at best somewhat decent shooter gameplay that you can also get in any other game, and at worst, you are showered with exactly these stupid gameplay decisions. Now to the second part of all this. Why do I not agree entirely with it being a bad Resident Evil either? For this we have to take a quick look at what a Resident Evil game actually is, which is also going to be controversial. But I would argue whether we have action or horror, fixed camera angles or first person, inventory management or no inventory management, and whatever else there has been in the past 30 years are not the deciding factors, as we've seen so many different sides of the franchise already that you can't just pinpoint a single one of those as the true Resident Evil identity. Instead, what really gives the games their identity is fighting BOWs, containing infections, defeating cartoonishly evil corporations and villains, and a heavy focus on replayability with highly enjoyable gameplay. In addition, there are also some trademark Resident Evil things that complete the feeling of playing these games, like healing with herbs, the weird key items and puzzles, countdowns until everything blows up, rocket launchers, and such. And if you think about it, at least to a certain degree, Resident Evil 6 has all these unique elements. Fighting BOWs, obviously, check. A virus outbreak, check. Cartoonishly evil villain that gets blasted by a rocket launcher, check. Highly enjoyable gameplay, not for me, but for some, check. Healing with herbs, kinda in a weird form, but check. Unusual key items and puzzles, barely, but still, check. The game surely doesn't nail most of these things, and it's even further from the survival horror roots than previous games, but you can't deny the inherent Resident Evil DNA this game's full of. And that's exactly why I not only think that RE6 is not a bad action game, just a bad Resident Evil, is not exactly accurate, but also why I think that the connection to the series definitely does not hurt the game in any sense. This identity is one of the main reasons people still care about it at all. Remove all those familiar elements and what remains is, in my opinion, a fairly generic action game with some occasionally interesting mechanics and a whole lot of bad design choices. And at that hypothetical point, there's no reason for Resident Evil fans to pick it up anymore, and for other players there are better options. Ultimately, I would probably go for the approach of calling it an at best mediocre action game and a honestly pretty decent Resident Evil. But what do you think? Please let me know down below. Apart from that, I want to thank Highboy870 for being a member of this channel. I appreciate it very much. And if you want to support me too, please subscribe, like and share if you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much and see you next time.